July 3rd, 1969. Baikonur, the Kazakh steppe. A rocket standing 105 meters tall sits on the launch pad, the most powerful rocket the Soviet Union had ever built. Thrust at liftoff, 4,500 tons. For comparison, America's Saturn V produced 3,400. The Soviet rocket was more powerful. It rose 200 meters. Then one of the 30 engines ingested a metal fragment. Fire broke out. 10 seconds later, the automated system shut down all engines. A 2,700-ton rocket fell back onto its own launch pad. The explosion was visible 50 kilometers away. 16 days. That's how long remained, until Apollo 11 landed on the moon. The Soviet Union was one step away, literally, and for the next 20 years, officially denied it ever tried. In 1961, John F. Kennedy announced to the entire world Americans would land on the moon before the end of the decade. The Soviet Union said nothing. That wasn't humility. That was strategy. While NASA openly built the Apollo program, budgets, press conferences, live broadcasts, the Soviet lunar program officially did not exist. No announcements, no deadlines, no names. Because Soviet doctrine was simple: only announce what you've already won. Inside the country, the program was running at full speed. Chief designer Sergei Korolev, the man who launched Sputnik and sent Gagarin into space, began designing a lunar rocket as early as 1962. It was called the N-1. The problem was the engines. The Americans had developed 5 powerful F-1 engines for the first stage of Saturn V. Soviet engineers couldn't build a single engine powerful and reliable enough. Korolev's solution fit 30 smaller engines instead. 30 engines firing simultaneously, in sync, in perfect coordination, for 125 seconds. This was an engineering gamble of extraordinary scale. And then, in January 1966, Korolev died on the operating table. He was 59 years old. It was a routine operation. The surgeon underestimated the complexity. Complications from the years Korolev had spent in the Gulag, where he was imprisoned for 6 years back in 1938. The man who was the Soviet space program vanished in a single day. His name, by the way, was a state secret. The whole world knew Gagarin. Nobody in the West knew Korolev. The Soviet state deliberately concealed his identity, so that if he died or failed, there would be no public face attached to the defeat. When he died, there was no obituary in the West, because the West didn't know who he was. The N-1 program was left without the man who held it together, and it began to fall apart. The N-1 flew 4 times. Every single time, catastrophe. February 1969. The first launch, the rocket climbed 12 kilometers. Fire in the engine compartment. The automatic system shut everything down. It fell back into the steppe. That one could still be hidden. The steppe is vast. No witnesses. July 3rd, 1969. The second launch, the one 16 days before Apollo 11, 200 meters, a metal fragment sucked into an engine, fire, automatic shutdown, 2,700 tons, falling straight back onto the launch pad. The explosion was equivalent to a small nuclear device. The entire launch complex, gone. 18 months to rebuild. The Americans caught it on a spy satellite. The CIA knew and said nothing. It was useful to let the Soviets keep burning resources on a failing program. June 1971, third launch. The rocket started spinning on its own axis seconds after liftoff, 51 seconds in. Explosion? Several kilometers up. November 1972, fourth launch. The closest it ever got. 107 seconds of normal flight. Then vibrations destroyed the turbopumps. Explosion. By that point, Americans had already landed on the moon 6 times and come back safely every single time. The race was lost. In 1974, the new head of the Soviet space program, Valentin Glushko, shut the N-1 project down. All blueprints destroyed, all hardware scrapped for metal, all data classified. Officially, the program had never existed. Soviet engineers who had spent decades working on the N-1 couldn't talk about it, not even to their families. One engineer recalled years later, "We gave the best years of our lives to something that officially never happened. We couldn't even grieve publicly." The truth didn't come out until 1990, when the Soviet Union was already dying. Here's what nobody usually says about this story. The USSR lost the moon race, but the Soviet space program of that era did something that Americans haven't fully replicated to this day. Lunokhod. While NASA was sending humans to the moon, expensive, dangerous, with a very real chance of losing a crew, Soviet engineers sent robots. In 1970, Lunokhod 1 drove 10 kilometers across the lunar surface, operated for 11 months, cost hundreds of times less than a crewed mission. Nobody risked their life. That same year, Luna 16 automatically collected samples of lunar soil and brought them back to Earth. No cosmonaut, no risk. The Soviets lost the race for prestige, but they found a different path to the moon, cheaper and safer. And there's one more detail almost nobody knows. The engines built for the N-1, the very ones that exploded 4 times, were purchased by the American company Aerojet after the Soviet collapse. They studied them, copied them, used them as the foundation for new designs. The technology of a rocket that officially never existed lives inside American engines to this day. The loser sometimes teaches the winner. But the real lesson of the N-1 isn't technical. Soviet engineers knew that 30 engines firing simultaneously was too complex. They said so to each other in their reports. They didn't write it. Because bad news was dangerous for your career, sometimes for your freedom. The 4 explosions weren't an engineering failure. They were the result of a system where fear mattered more than truth. The Soviet Union disappeared in 1991. The N-1 was officially declassified only in 1990, 1 year before the country ceased to exist. Engineers could finally talk. Some cried in their first interviews, not from grief, but because for the first time in 20 years, they could say out loud what they had done. Today, at the site of the explosion of July 3, 1969, in the Kazakh steppe, nothing. Flat land, wind. Baikonur still operates. Russia still launches rockets from that same ground. But the N-1 exists nowhere. Not in museums, not in textbooks, not in monuments. The most powerful rocket the USSR ever built vanished as quietly as it appeared. Only one number remains: 16 days. That is how close the Soviet rocket was to the moon. On that July evening in 1969, when it fell back to Earth, the technology didn't fail. The engineers didn't fail. A system where you cannot speak the truth always loses, sooner or later. In space, it simply happens faster and louder. 16 days, and a different history of humanity. Space forgives no compromises. Never. Not for Soviet engineers in 1969, not today. If this story got to you, subscribe below. See you next time.